Everyone calls this the most violent twister in history. Wrong. Not even close. A legendary vortex back in 1999 clocked atmospheric speeds over 300 miles an hour. Another monster in 1925 killed almost 700 folks. So why does Tuscaloosa still stop residents cold 15 years later? Because on April 27th, at 4:43 in the afternoon, something touched down in Alabama that didn't need a record book to become a historic nightmare. 91 minutes on the ground, 80.68 miles of raw devastation, a path a mile and a half wide, 64 souls never made it home. And by the time it lifted near Birmingham, this tempest had forced an entire territory to rewrite safety laws. This isn't about the biggest cyclone ever recorded. It's about what one afternoon of howling gales can do to a city that never saw it coming. April 27, 2011 wasn't just one bad event. It was one day inside the worst twister outbreak the United States had seen in decades. 360 confirmed cyclones touched down across 21 states in 4 days. 360. Think about that for a second. That's not a standard weather system. That's a war zone with no enemy, just terrifying currents of air. If you lived in the South that day, you remember exactly where you were. Alabama took the hardest hit, and Tuscaloosa sat in the crosshairs. By mid-afternoon, the sky over the city turned the color of a deep bruise. Meteorologists watched a colossal supercell forming southwest of town, and every radar image told them the same thing. This one was different, bigger, meaner, built to last. Could anyone really have been ready for the sheer force heading their way? At 4:43 p.m., the funnel touched ground southwest of the city. It didn't waste time. Within minutes, it grew into a wedge of black cloud wider than most city blocks, chewing through Tuscaloosa's south side like it had somewhere to be. Homes vanished. Trees snapped at the trunk. Cars lifted off roads like they weighed nothing. Across the region, broadcaster James Spann stood between millions of citizens and total panic. Spann stayed on the air for over 12 hours straight, even as cameras failed and the internet feed cut out. At one point, watching the destruction on radar with no way to warn families, Spann told his viewers the only thing left to do was pray. Think about that. A professional meteorologist, live on television, telling an entire population that science had run out of options. The giant kept growing as it moved northeast, and by the time it crossed Interstate 65, it turned into something almost impossible to picture. 2,600 yards wide. Picture that. A mile and a half of pure destruction moving toward you all at once. Velocity speeds estimated near 190 miles an hour, tearing through anything in its path. A 36-ton coal car got thrown off its tracks like a toy. Roads were ripped out of the ground. This wasn't simple atmospheric fury anymore. It was closer to an avalanche made of air, heading straight into neighborhoods where kids were walking home from school. Whole blocks in Tuscaloosa's Alberta City and Rosedale neighborhoods disappeared in seconds. Not damaged, disappeared. Gone, block by block, like someone erased them off a map. Adam Melton was hiding in a nearby cellar when the disaster struck. And as the storm raged, a heavy Jeep Cherokee flew through the air, grazing his head before coming to rest beside him. Buried, trapped, alive, somehow. The second the gale died down, Melton climbed out from under the rubble. How does a 20-year-old kid go from being crushed under a massive vehicle to saving other lives in the same afternoon? That's Tuscaloosa in one story. Total devastation, and ordinary souls who absolutely refuse to quit. Across town, Perlene Hinton watched the menace coming on her television screen and made a choice that saved her life. She climbed into the bathtub while her son Kendrell hugged the floor beside her and started praying while the world outside came apart. The apartment roof tore off. Cars flew past the apartment building like they'd been thrown by something enormous. She stayed in that tub, holding her son until the roar stopped screaming. Simple decision. Bathtub over doorway, cast iron over drywall. Could you make that same call in your own house with seconds to decide? That choice, made in an instant, is the difference between a survivor's account and a headline. Multiply her decision by thousands of families across 3 counties that afternoon, and you start to understand how anyone made it out alive. Here's what still makes meteorological circles argue 15 years later. The National Weather Service rated this twister a high-end EF4, not an EF5. And plenty of meteorologists looked at the slabbed homes, the completely debarked trees, and the pulverized concrete, and asked how that's even possible. The answer isn't comforting. The enhanced Fujita scale doesn't measure physical velocity directly. It measures damage to structures, and an EF5 rating requires homes built strong enough to prove those extreme gusts actually happened. Many houses in the path simply weren't built to that rigorous structural standard. They failed before the vortex could prove its own strength. So the tempest might have been stronger than its official rating. We'll never know for certain, because the buildings in its path couldn't tell us. When the Fury finally let go northeast of Birmingham, it left behind numbers that still stop conversations cold. 64 lives directly cut short, 8 more lost indirectly in the days after. More than 1,500 individuals injured, some pulled from rubble that used to be their homes. The property damage totaled $2.4 billion. An entire neighborhood's worth of savings turned to splinters before rush hour even ended. Ambulances couldn't get down streets that no longer existed. Hospitals filled faster than staff could count patients. This is the part nobody wants to sit with, but it's the part that matters most. A single afternoon in a single American city cost dozens of families everything they had. Alabama couldn't undo what happened, but lawmakers refused to let it happen the same way twice. In 2010, the state government passed a law requiring heavy shelters in every new public school built across the region. That's not a small policy change. That's an entire community looking at dozens of grieving families and deciding no more. What does it look like when a territory finally says enough? No more waiting in hallways with nothing but a coat over your head. No more praying in a school building with zero protection from a mile-wide wall of flying debris. Every new school built in Alabama since carries a piece of that March afternoon inside its structural walls, whether the kids inside ever hear the account or not. Concrete literally poured deep into the ground. The damage didn't stop at buildings and families. In September 2025, findings published on NASA Earth data showed the path of the monster permanently changed Alabama's forests, killing off tree cover in patterns you can still see from space today, 15 years on. The scar on the ground hasn't healed. It just changed shape. Then, in April 2026, the city of Tuscaloosa held memorial events marking 15 years since that tragic afternoon, showing crowds how neighborhoods once flattened had been completely rebuilt block by block. Streets that were unrecognizable rubble in 2011 now hold new schools, new homes, and families who weren't even born when the sirens first wailed. Rebuilding took over a decade. Healing, judging by what NASA found in the tree line, is still happening right now, one ring of a tree at a time. So no, this wasn't the most violent twister ever recorded. Somewhere in Oklahoma, an event from 1999 still holds the speed record. Somewhere in the history books, 1925 still holds the tragic U.S. death toll. But records don't measure what actually happened here. Records don't capture a meteorologist telling his region to pray because science had nothing left. They don't capture a kid crawling out from under a Jeep to save his neighbors, or a mother holding her son in a bathtub while her house vanished around her. Over an hour and a half on the ground, an 80-mile scar carved across central Alabama, and dozens of lives lost that Tuscaloosa will never forget. Forget the record books. This is the disaster that will make you rethink what a single afternoon can do to a place you love. That's the whole story. It's still writing itself, one tree ring, one new school, one memorial at a time.